Hey, Wide Awake family. If you see this, it's your sign to smash that like button. Yes, you listening right now. That way YouTube shows you more amazing stories like this one. We love you all. Now enjoy the stories.
He was one of those guys who came off confident without trying too hard. We met on an app, and his messages were always smooth, short, clever, a bit mysterious. He said he worked in logistics, which could mean anything, but he talked like someone who made good money and didn't care much about rules. I didn't think twice about it. People always make their jobs sound fancier online. He picked a quiet Italian place downtown for dinner. It wasn't overly fancy, but nice enough that the waiters wore white shirts and there were candles on the tables. When I got there, he was already sitting near the back, the kind of seat where you can see the whole restaurant. He stood up, pulled out a chair for me, and gave that casual smile like he did this kind of thing a lot. From the start, he talked like he wanted to impress me. He kept bringing up how he knew people. At first, I thought he meant socially, like knowing people in the industry or having good connections. But the more he talked, the more it sounded like something else. He mentioned traveling for business, buying things under the radar, and knowing people who could get anything. He laughed when he said it, like it was just talk, but there was something in his eyes that didn't match the tone. I brushed it off. Sometimes guys exaggerate just to look cool. I didn't want to assume the worst. We ordered pasta, and he started telling me about random things, cars, watches, and a side hustle he had. Every so often, he glanced for the waiter or checked his phone. It wasn't like he was nervous, but more like he was expecting someone. When dessert came, that's when things got weird. He leaned in closer, voice low, and started talking about how the internet had changed everything. He said he knew people who sold rare items online, stuff he couldn't find in normal stores. He laughed about it like it was a joke, but it didn't sound like one. He said things like, "It's not illegal if you're smart about it." I remember nodding awkwardly, not knowing what to say. The restaurant was dim, soft music playing, everyone else just eating quietly while he casually talked about sketchy online deals like he was describing the weather. Halfway through dessert, this guy at the next table stood up. He looked normal, button-up shirt, jeans, nothing special. He walked over slowly and said something to my date. My date froze. The guy reached into his jacket, pulled out a badge, and suddenly the whole place went silent. Within seconds, two more people came in from the front entrance, both wearing plain clothes, but moving with that sharp, controlled posture you only see in cops or security. My stomach dropped instantly. The man flashed the badge again and said something about an ongoing investigation. My date's chair screeched as he tried to stand, but they were already on him. It happened so fast I barely processed it. One of them grabbed his wrist. The other took his phone off the table. The one with the badge said they had a warrant, and that this was part of an online black market sting operation. The entire restaurant froze. A few people stood up, some whispering, others recording. My date just stared at me for a second like he couldn't believe it was happening. He didn't look angry, just empty, like everything in his head shut down at once. One of the officers told me to stay seated. I remember my heart pounding so loud I couldn't even hear what they were saying next. They put him in handcuffs right there in front of everyone. The waitress dropped a tray behind us. Someone near the door gasped. They started escorting him out. As they passed me, one of the officers picked up the small black folder that had been sitting under the table near his leg. They opened it quickly, and I caught a glimpse of what was inside: printed sheets, lists of items, prices, and weird usernames. It looked like a catalog of stolen stuff, like jewelry, electronics, maybe even IDs. The officer looked at me and asked if I knew anything about it. I said no, that it was our first date. He nodded, said it wasn't my fault, but they needed a short statement before I could leave. The room stayed quiet even after they walked out with him. Everyone pretended to go back to eating, but you could feel how tense it was. The waiter came by, apologizing, like it was somehow their fault, and I just sat there staring at the candlelight flickering in front of me. Later, when they finished talking to me outside, they explained a bit more. They said my date had been part of an online ring dealing in stolen goods and illegal imports. They'd been tracking his transactions for months, tracing messages and accounts across multiple platforms. They used fake buyer profiles to lure him into meeting in person. He thought he was setting up a drop, but instead he was being watched the entire time. Apparently, the table next to us had two undercover officers sitting there all along. They'd been waiting for him to mention or hand over something specific. The whole dinner was being monitored from outside in unmarked cars. They told me I wasn't in trouble, but to be cautious if anyone tried contacting me afterward. I remember saying, so this was all a setup. And one of them said, it was for him, not you. I didn't say much after that. They let me go once I signed a quick statement. I sat in my car for a while before driving home, trying to process everything. It didn't feel real. I kept replaying the night in my head, the way he'd smiled, the confidence in his tone, how calm he'd seemed, the way he bragged about knowing people. I thought it was just ego, but now I realized he meant something darker. That night, the story made the local news. I read the headline online. Undercover operation leads to arrest in black market trafficking case. There was no photo of him yet, but the article mentioned an upscale restaurant and a sting involving stolen goods worth over $150,000. The comments were full of people debating it, some saying it was fake, others saying they'd heard about similar cases. I didn't even know his last name. I didn't want to. The more I thought about it, the more it scared me how normal he'd seemed. No signs, no clues. Just a regular guy sitting across from me, cutting into his dessert, waiting for a deal that never came. I deleted the app that night, not because I thought everyone online was a criminal, but because I couldn't stop picturing him sitting there, phone buzzing, smirking about how connected he was, seconds before everything crashed down around him. She said she was a nurse, and honestly, that sounded impressive. Out of all the people I'd met online, she was one of the few who seemed to actually have her life together. Her profile picture was just her in scrubs, no filters, no over-the-top poses. She looked like someone real, someone responsible. She texted like that too. Punctual, polite, confident. So when she suggested we meet at the hospital cafeteria where she worked, I thought it was kind of weird, but she explained it like it was no big deal. She said she was on a long shift and could sneak away for an hour during her break. It didn't sound romantic, but it felt spontaneous in a cool way. She said the food there was better than people thought, and besides, it would be quiet, private, easy to talk. So I went. The hospital was huge. One of those tall, cold-looking buildings that smelled like disinfectant even before you walk in. The lights inside were bright enough to make you squint. I texted her when I got there, and she said she'd meet me in the cafeteria on the second floor. When I walked in, she was already sitting at a corner table by the window, sipping coffee from one of those paper cups. She waved, smiling, and I remember thinking she looked exactly like her pictures. Same brown scrubs, ID badge clipped to her shirt, calm and focused. We started talking, and she was great at it. She told me she loved her job, that it gave her purpose. She talked about how hard the last few months had been. Short-staffed, long hours, endless patience. I believed her because she sounded tired in that way only real nurses do. I remember feeling kind of guilty for bothering her on what was probably her only break. She said she worked in a restricted area upstairs, something about emergency care and monitoring. She said it casually, like she didn't mean to mention it, then changed the subject quickly. I didn't push it. The cafeteria was nearly empty except for a few hospital workers eating quietly, some in scrubs, some in regular clothes. The smell of reheated food mixed with hand sanitizer. Every few minutes, you could hear a distant beep or an intercom call from another floor. She checked her phone a few times, but not in an annoying way, more like she was expecting something work-related. She smiled a lot but had that twitchy sort of energy underneath it, like her brain was somewhere else. Halfway through the meal, she said she needed to grab something from her locker and would be right back. I offered to wait, and she nodded, walking toward the hallway near the elevators. A few minutes passed, then 5, then 10. I started feeling awkward sitting there alone with her half-eaten sandwich across from me. I texted her asking if everything was okay. No response. I figured maybe her shift got called early or she had to help with something urgent. It was a hospital after all. Then everything changed. Out of nowhere, alarms started going off, loud, sharp, echoing down the hallways. People in the cafeteria froze. You could hear the sound of running footsteps and the intercom announcing something about a lockdown in the north wing. A nurse near the counter looked at her coworker with wide eyes, and I could tell this wasn't some routine drill. People started leaving, some calmly, some not. A few security guards ran past the cafeteria doors toward the elevators. I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe it was a fire alarm or a missing patient situation. But then I heard someone say there'd been a breach in a restricted ward. That word stuck. Breach. I stayed seated for a few minutes, pretending to stay calm, even though my stomach was starting to twist. My phone buzzed, a text from her. It said, "Don't move. Please just stay there." That's when I knew something was wrong. 2 minutes later, security came rushing into the cafeteria. One of them pointed at me and asked if I'd been sitting with someone in scrubs, a nurse around my age. I said yes, that she just left. They told me to stay where I was and radioed something I couldn't understand. Then they ran off toward the stairwell. The whole place turned chaotic. People started whispering, phones going off, hospital staff looking panicked. One of the cafeteria workers locked the side doors. The alarms kept blaring. About 20 minutes later, they escorted everyone out into the hallway. That's when I saw her again. 2 security guards were walking her down the corridor, her hands behind her back. Her hair was messy, her scrubs torn near the sleeve, and her badge was gone. She didn't look at me, but I saw her face. She wasn't scared. She looked angry. They led her past a group of officers standing near a door that had been sealed off with yellow tape. I overheard one of them say she used a stolen ID to access a restricted ward. Something about medications, files, and unauthorized entry. The pieces started fitting together, but it didn't make sense. The nurse I just had coffee with wasn't supposed to be someone capable of breaking into a hospital wing. Later, a police officer came over and asked me a bunch of questions. How long I'd known her, what we talked about, whether I'd noticed anything suspicious. I told him everything. He explained that she wasn't actually a nurse there. The badge she was wearing belonged to a real nurse who'd reported it missing 2 days earlier. Apparently, she'd been trying to steal medical supplies and controlled substances from one of the restricted wards. The staff had already been on alert for someone using fake credentials. When she scanned her way in earlier that night, the system flagged the access, which triggered the alarm. I just stood there while the officer talked, trying to process that I'd been sitting across from someone pretending to work there. She'd known I wouldn't question it. Who questions a person in scrubs, sitting in a hospital cafeteria? They told me she'd been doing this at multiple hospitals, using stolen badges to sneak into medical areas and steal things she could sell. Sometimes she posed as staff. Sometimes she pretended to be a visitor. She was already wanted for it in 2 other cities. I didn't even realize until that moment that her badge had another name on it. She must have flipped it backward when she sat down. When they finally let me go, the halls were still buzzing with staff trying to calm everything down. I walked out through the main entrance into the cold night air. The flashing lights from the police cars made the glass doors glow blue and red. The last time I saw her, she was getting loaded into the back of one of those cars. She looked straight ahead, blank, like none of it mattered. Driving home, I couldn't stop thinking about how normal she'd seemed, how she'd smiled and talked about helping people, about long shifts and saving lives. Every word had been a lie. The next morning, the story was online. Woman arrested after attempted theft at City Hospital. No names, just a blurry photo of her being escorted out. It said she'd been impersonating nurses for months, slipping through security systems using stolen IDs. That night could have gone 100 different ways, but I guess I was just another piece of her cover, a random person she met to make herself look like she belonged. He was the kind of guy who looked too calm for his own good. Clean haircut, ironed shirt, polite smile. The kind of person who made you think the date would be uneventful in a good way. We'd been messaging for a couple of weeks, and he always came across confident, even funny sometimes. He picked a cozy little restaurant downtown. Nothing fancy, but nice enough that it felt like he actually put thought into it. When I got there, he was already sitting at a table by the window. He stood up right away, waved, and smiled. First impressions were solid. He was friendly, attentive, and surprisingly talkative. For the first few minutes, everything felt normal. But then he started checking his phone. Constantly. At first, I brushed it off. Everyone does that sometimes. Maybe it was work or a family thing. But it wasn't just a quick glance here and there. Every couple of minutes, he'd pick it up, stare at the screen for a few seconds, type something, then put it down again. His smile would flicker each time, like he was trying to act relaxed but couldn't quite manage it. It got distracting fast. He'd start telling a story, then stop halfway through because his phone buzzed. The worst part was, he kept apologizing, but never explained why he was so jumpy. I tried to ignore it. The restaurant was busy, filled with low chatter and the sound of clinking glasses. I ordered a drink just to have something to focus on. The waitress came over. He ordered it quickly, barely looking up. His eyes darted toward the entrance a few times, like he was expecting someone to walk in. Under the table, there was this black leather bag by his feet. I noticed it when he bent down to grab his napkin. It looked heavy, like the kind of bag people use for gym gear or tech equipment. I didn't think much of it, but he kept nudging it closer with his foot, like he didn't want anyone else to notice it was there. The more I watched him, the more his body language gave him away. His shoulders were tight, his breathing uneven. He wasn't paying attention to anything I said anymore. It felt like his brain was somewhere else completely. I started wondering if maybe he was married or hiding something dumb like a second life or debt collectors. Anything would have made more sense than the weird nervous energy radiating off him. Our food came, and he barely touched his plate. He'd pick at it, scroll through his phone again, glance at the door, then look down at the table. It was like he was waiting for something or someone. Then maybe 15 minutes later, it all went downhill fast. Two men walked in, dressed casually but moving like they weren't there to eat. They stood near the entrance, scanning the room. One of them touched his ear like he was listening to someone through a headset. I thought maybe they were security guards or detectives. I wasn't sure. My date froze. He went pale, eyes locked on them. His hand slid under the table toward the bag, and I swear my whole body tensed up. He whispered something under his breath, like a curse. Before I could ask what was going on, the two men started moving fast. Chairs scraped, people looked up, and suddenly, 3 more officers came in from the side door. One of them yelled for him to get his hands up. The whole restaurant went dead silent. He didn't move at first. Then, out of nowhere, he tried to grab the bag and stand up. That's when they tackled him. Hard. The table flipped halfway, glasses shattered, and I jumped back in my seat as one of the officers grabbed his arm and twisted it behind him. People were screaming. The waitress dropped a tray near the kitchen, and someone yelled to call the police before realizing they were already there. I backed away, completely frozen. They cuffed him on the floor right next to the bag. One officer picked it up carefully, unzipped it, and I'll never forget what was inside. Jewelry. Dozens of pieces. Watches, necklaces, rings. Some of them still had tags. It looked like a small treasure chest dumped into a duffel. The officer zipped it back up and looked at the others. One of them muttered something about the string of robberies. My date, if you could even call him that anymore, just kept his head down, breathing heavy. They pulled him to his feet, regained his rights, and walked him out while the whole restaurant stared. He looked over his shoulder once as they pushed him toward the door, eyes wide like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. Then he was gone. The room was quiet for a few seconds, everyone trying to process what just happened. Then the murmurs started, people whispering, taking photos, talking about how they'd just seen a man get arrested right in front of them. One of the officers came over to me, asked if I was with him. I said it was a first date, that I didn't know anything. He nodded like he'd heard that before. He said they'd been tracking him for days. He was wanted for a string of high-end jewelry store robberies across the city. Apparently, he'd been meeting people from dating apps and bringing the stolen stuff with him while waiting for a buyer to message him. The nervous phone checking finally made sense. He wasn't texting friends. He was waiting to hear from someone who was supposed to show up and take the stolen goods off his hands. I must have looked completely shocked because the officer told me I wasn't in trouble, but they'd need a quick statement. I sat there, trying to remember anything important, his name, what he'd said, anything that might help. When they left, the restaurant slowly went back to normal, or at least tried to. The waiter started cleaning up the broken glass. A few people left early, and others kept whispering like it was the craziest story they'd ever tell their friends. I just sat there for a while, staring at his untouched plate. The food was getting cold. The chair across from me was empty, the air still heavy from everything that just happened. Later that night, I saw it on the news. A man arrested at a downtown restaurant in connection with a jewelry heist. His photo was right there, the same nervous eyes, same blank expression. They said police had been following his movements since he'd been spotted pawning stolen goods under fake names. He apparently been using dating apps to stay invisible, setting up meetings in public to make himself look normal. No one would suspect a guy out on a dinner date to be carrying stolen luxury watches worth Thousands. When I read that, it hit me how close I'd been to being dragged into something insane without even knowing. If the cops hadn't shown up when they did, who knows how that night would have ended. Now when I see someone checking their phone too much on a date, I don't just assume they're bored. Sometimes they're waiting for something you don't want to be around for. It was one of those random nights where I almost canceled the date but didn't. She'd seemed chill online, normal job, decent photos, nothing flashy or sketchy. Her name was Alana, and she suggested we meet for coffee at a small motel cafe on the edge of town. It sounded weird at first, but she said it had the best pie around and was quiet enough to actually talk. I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe she liked hidden places, something low-key. The drive there felt longer than it should have. The roads were empty, and the farther I went, the darker it got. The motel was one of those older ones that had probably been there since the 80s. Half the neon lights burnt out, a sign flickering "Vac NC Wooly" in dull red. The cafe was attached to the side, with a couple of cars in the lot and a broken vending machine humming by the door. She was already sitting inside when I got there, waiting like she'd been waiting a while. She looked exactly like her pictures, brown hair tied back, plain clothes, quiet smile. There was something calm about her, too calm maybe, like nothing around her ever bothered her. She had a cup of coffee already and an empty chair across from her. The place smelled like burnt toast and cleaning spray. Only a few other people were inside, 2 men at the counter eating breakfast food, and an older woman refilling napkin holders near the window. The waitress barely looked up when I walked in. We started talking and it was easy enough at first. She said she didn't like loud restaurants or bars, that this cafe was sort of her go-to spot when she wanted peace. She asked a lot of questions. What I did for work, if I lived alone, how far I was from family. At first, I thought she was just curious, but the way she asked was oddly specific, like she was collecting details, not just chatting. Then she started talking about travel, how she'd been to other countries and met people who helped her start over. She said it like it was some self-improvement thing, so I nodded along, pretending to understand. She told me that sometimes people just needed to disappear for a bit and find somewhere new to live. Her tone didn't match what she was saying. She said it casually, like she was talking about moving cities for a job, but the way she stared past me made it sound heavier. I kept noticing people walking in and out of the cafe. Men mostly. They didn't order anything. They just walk up to the counter, talk quietly to the woman behind it, and then leave. None of them looked like customers. Alana didn't seem fazed by it. She even waved at one of them as he passed. 15 minutes in, I started to feel uncomfortable. The vibe was wrong. Too many people coming and going, nobody eating, everyone acting like they were waiting for something. The waitress kept glancing toward the back hallway that led to the motel rooms, and every so often, a door would open and close behind it. I told myself I was overthinking, that maybe the cafe doubled as a meeting spot for locals or something. But then 2 guys came in wearing jackets that didn't fit the usual crowd. One of them had a radio clipped to his belt. They sat opposite corners of the cafe, not talking to each other, just watching. Alana noticed too. Her posture stiffened, but she tried to hide it. She took a slow sip of her coffee, glanced toward the hallway, then toward the counter. You could feel the tension shift instantly. The woman behind the counter froze mid-motion, and the waitress stopped walking. It happened so fast, I didn't even process it at first. The front doors burst open, and armed officers rushed in shouting commands. People screamed, chairs fell, cups shattered. I ducked instinctively, my heart pounding so hard I couldn't hear anything else. The entire room filled with voices yelling, "Hands where we can see them," and nobody move. Alana didn't move at all. She just sat there, eyes on the table, hands flat. 2 officers ran straight to the back hallway. Others surrounded the counter. Within seconds, they had people lined up against the wall. I kept my hands visible, trying not to make any sudden movements. One officer came up to our table, gun drawn, and told us both to stand slowly. Alana stood first, calm as ever. The officer looked at her, then at a photo on a folded paper he was holding. His expression changed immediately. He told her to turn around and placed her in handcuffs. I stood there frozen while they read her rights. My brain couldn't connect what was happening. She didn't resist, didn't even speak. She just nodded slightly, like she knew this was coming. They started leading her out when the woman behind the counter tried to make a run for the back hallway. The officers caught her before she got far. The whole cafe turned into chaos. People crying, shouting, the sound of radios crackling. One officer told me to stay seated and asked how I knew her. I said it was our first date. He gave me a look like he didn't believe it but told me to sit tight. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, they started bringing people out from the back rooms. Some of them looked terrified, mostly young women, a few men, all escorted by officers. That's when it clicked. The motel wasn't just a motel. The officer who questioned me came back and said they'd been investigating the place for months. It was part of a human trafficking network that used small roadside motels as fronts. The cafe was the safe face of it. People like Alana acted as recruiters, finding vulnerable targets, pretending to offer jobs or new lives, and luring them there. He said they'd been tracking her online for weeks, but tonight was the first time she'd shown up in person after going quiet. I was apparently the first civilian they'd seen her meet since the investigation started. The more they told me, the sicker I felt. The questions she asked me, where I lived, if I was close to family, if I'd like to travel, they weren't small talk. They were tests. She was trying to see if anyone would notice if I went missing. When they finally let me leave, the parking lot was full of flashing lights, mans, and officers. They had people lined up outside the motel rooms, some handcuffed, some wrapped in blankets. I walked past them in a daze. Before I got into my car, I looked back once. Alana was standing near one of the patrol cars, hands cuffed, head down. For a second, she looked up and our eyes met. She didn't look scared or angry. She looked empty. Like whatever version of her I met was just a mask she'd worn for too long. Driving home that night didn't feel real. Every streetlight, every car behind me made my stomach twist. I couldn't stop thinking about what would have happened if the raid hadn't happened when it did. If they'd waited another day, another hour. The next morning, there was already an article online. Police raid motel cafe and human trafficking bust. Her name was there, listed under recruiters. Her face was smaller, paler, the mugshot version of the person who'd smiled at me across the table hours earlier. That photo stuck with me for weeks. I deleted the app after that. Every time I pass a motel now, even just on the highway, I can't help but think about that night, how close I came to being another person who just disappeared quietly, one table away from danger I didn't even see coming. He came across as one of those calm, trustworthy types, the kind of guy you'd introduce to your parents without overthinking it. His profile said he was good with kids, which I thought was kind of cute, even though I didn't have any. He said he worked in property, loved volunteering, and had a soft spot for dogs. He messaged me first, and the conversation was easy from the start. No weird compliments, no strange jokes. Just normal talk. That was rare enough to make me agree to dinner. He picked a family-style Italian restaurant, the kind with booths and old photos on the walls. It was bright, crowded, the kind of place where you feel safe meeting someone new. He was already there when I arrived, sitting with a glass of water and a small smile like he'd been waiting a while. He stood up, said I looked nice, and even pulled the chair out for me. Everything about him was so normal it almost felt fake. His clothes were clean but casual. His voice was calm, his smile easy. He talked about growing up with a big family, about coaching youth football on weekends, about how kids had this energy that kept him grounded. I thought it was wholesome. You could tell he'd said all of it before, but it didn't come across rehearsed, just practiced, like he'd told the story so many times it became muscle memory. He said he'd been divorced for a few years. No bitterness, no drama, just life went different ways. That sounded believable. He didn't have any visible red flags. The restaurant was busy, people talking over each other, kids running around between tables. He seemed comfortable in the chaos. He even waved at one of the toddlers who waddled past us holding a breadstick, and the kid waved back. I remember thinking, yeah, he really is good with kids. We ordered food and the conversation flowed. He asked about my family, my work, my friends. He listened. He didn't interrupt. Every so often, he'd glance at the clock on his phone like he was tracking something, but he'd catch himself and put it away fast. I assumed he was just checking the time. Around halfway through the meal, the energy around us started to shift. The hostess walked quickly toward the front, whispering to a waiter. Then another staff member appeared, talking into a small radio clipped to their shirt. I noticed a few people near the door looking outside. Blue lights were flashing faintly through the window reflection, but I thought maybe it was an ambulance driving by. He noticed too. He froze mid-bite and smiled again like nothing was wrong, but his hand started tapping under the table. A few seconds later, the door swung open. A woman came in fast, followed by 3 kids and a uniformed police officer. The whole restaurant went quiet for half a second, like someone had turned the volume down. The woman's eyes locked onto him immediately. He didn't turn around. He just stared down at his plate, fork still in hand, the color draining from his face. The woman shouted his full name so loudly that half the restaurant heard it. The officer moved up beside her, asking her to calm down, but she ignored him. She pointed straight at our table, voice shaking as she said he'd been missing for 2 days. I sat frozen. Missing? He looked up then, finally turning toward her. The kids behind her, 2 girls and a boy, looked exhausted, eyes red like they'd been crying. The boy couldn't have been older than 7. One of the girls clutched the woman's hand. The officer stepped forward, asking him to stand up. He didn't move. For a long second, it felt like everything around us stopped. No clinking glasses, no music, nothing. Just her breathing heavy and him sitting completely still. Then he stood slowly, muttering something I couldn't hear. The officer grabbed his wrist, and suddenly, the calm, friendly man from 10 minutes ago was gone. He tensed up, eyes darting toward the exit like he was thinking about running. The officer grabbed his arm harder, told him not to move. The woman started crying, the kids too, and people around the restaurant began whispering. It turned out he hadn't been divorced at all. He had a wife, 3 children, and had disappeared after an argument with her 2 nights earlier. She filed a missing person report. He'd taken cash from their joint account, turned off his phone, and just vanished. She thought something had happened to him. Then one of her friends saw a story on social media about a man matching his description being spotted in the same area on a dating app. That's how she found him. The officer said they'd tracked his car outside the restaurant after she called. When they found him sitting inside calmly eating pasta with someone new, she lost it. They cuffed him right there next to the booth. He kept his head down, saying nothing. The officer led him out the door, his wife following behind, still crying, the kids trailing after her. The youngest one stopped for a second and looked at me, this confused, tired stare I'll never forget. Everyone in the restaurant went quiet for a minute. The waitress came over, looking horrified, and asked if I was okay. I just nodded, even though I wasn't sure what to feel. When they were gone, people started talking again, but it wasn't normal noise. It was whispers, scattered and uneasy. Some people were staring at me, probably wondering if I knew him if I'd been part of it. The manager came by later to check in. He told me the police had confirmed the guy was indeed listed as missing. Apparently he'd left his phone, his wallet, everything behind at home. His wife had been out of her mind trying to find him. They'd even organized a small search group in their area, and the whole time he'd just been pretending to be single, going on dates, acting like nothing existed outside of whatever story he told. When I got home that night, I looked up his name online. There was already a short article about the police locating a missing man at a restaurant. It didn't go into detail, but I recognized the words. Found safe. That was it. I went back through our messages after that. All little things he'd said about being good with kids, about needing a break from stress, about how he finally felt free. It all read differently now. Every line sounded like someone running from their life. It messed with me for a while, thinking about how easily someone can live a double life right in front of you. How normal he'd seemed, how he'd smiled, how he'd said all the right things, how he talked about kids like they were the best part of life, when his own were out there thinking he was gone for good. That dinner was the first and last time I ever saw him. It started off normal, one of those casual Friday night dates where you don't expect much, just dinner, maybe a laugh. See how it goes. I met her on an app. Her name was Tasha. She looked fun in her pictures, had that confident energy that made you think she'd be the kind of person who could make any night interesting. We texted for a few days, then decided to meet at this Italian restaurant downtown. When I got there, she was already sitting at a booth by the window, but what threw me off immediately was that she wasn't alone. Another girl was sitting beside her, waving at me like she already knew who I was. Tasha smiled and said this was her best friend, Mia. I tried not to look confused. She said Mia didn't want her going alone since she'd never met me before. I figured, fair enough. Safety reasons, right? It made sense. We ordered drinks and the vibe was fine at first. Tasha was chatty. Mia laughed at everything she said, and I just went with it. It was a little weird having a third person there, but I didn't want to make things awkward by mentioning it. They both seemed nice, even if Maya was talking a bit too much for someone who wasn't supposed to be on the date. The restaurant was busy, people celebrating birthdays, couples on dates, groups sharing pizza. There was background noise everywhere. The kind of noise that made you feel like you could disappear into the crowd. Tasha and Mia were whispering every so often, leaning close, glancing around. I thought they were talking about me, but then I realized they weren't even looking at me, they were looking past me. Tasha excused herself to go to the bathroom, and Mia stayed, tapping on her phone. She didn't say much, just kept glancing toward the bar. When Tasha came back, she had this look like something had gone wrong, but she was pretending it hadn't. She sat down fast, pulled her phone out, and started typing again. I tried to keep the conversation normal. We talked about music, travel, random things. But it felt off. Mia kept scanning the room while pretending to sip her drink. Every time a waiter walked by, they both got quiet. When the food came, they suddenly relaxed, laughing again, acting normal. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe they were nervous, or maybe Maya was just a weird friend who didn't know how to act on a date that wasn't hers. Then it happened. While I was talking, I noticed Tasha drop something on the floor beside the booth. She leaned down to grab it, but she stayed there a bit too long. I thought maybe she was fixing her shoe or something, but when she came back up, she had this quick, guilty look on her face. Mia smiled immediately after, like they were sharing some inside joke. A few minutes later, a man from the table behind us got up and started patting his pockets. You could see the confusion on his face. He called over a waiter and started talking fast. I didn't pay much attention until another woman from across the restaurant started doing the same thing, checking her bag, her coat, looking panicked. The noise in the restaurant shifted from laughter to tension. You could feel it spreading like a wave. That's when I noticed Mia slipping something small into her tote bag. I caught it for just a second, the edge of a wallet. My stomach dropped. I looked at Tasha, and she was staring down at her plate like she hadn't noticed anything. It hit me all at once. They were stealing. They were using me as cover. Before I could even say anything, the manager walked over to the man behind us, and within seconds, someone must call the police. The front door was blocked off by a staff member. People were murmuring, looking around, checking their things. Tasha leaned over and whispered something to Mia, who immediately stood up and said she was going to the bathroom. Tasha turned to me, forced a smile, and said she was going to check on her. Then she slid out of the booth and started heading toward the exit instead of the bathroom. 2 police officers walked in before she could reach the door. Everything froze. They started talking to the manager, who pointed toward our section. One of the officers went straight toward Tasha. She stopped walking. The whole restaurant went quiet except for the sound of cutlery clinking. They asked her to open her bag. She tried to play it off, said she didn't know what was going on. But when they looked inside, you could see it clearly: wallets, a few credit cards, even a small chain of car keys. Mia must have dumped everything into Tasha's bag before slipping out the side door. The cops handcuffed her right there in front of everyone. She started crying, saying it wasn't her, that her friend must have set her up. People were staring. The man whose wallet had been stolen stepped forward and identified one of his cards sticking out of her bag. Then they turned to me. One of the officers asked if I was with her. I said yes, but I didn't know anything about it. He asked if I'd met her before tonight, if I knew the other girl. I told him I didn't even know her name until she sat down. He looked skeptical, but told me to stay put while they sorted things out. For the next half hour, I sat there in silence while they went through her stuff. They found multiple stolen IDs, a fake license, and receipts from other restaurants. The manager said 2 wallets had gone missing the week before under similar circumstances. Apparently, this was their pattern. They'd go on dates with random guys from dating apps, bring the best friend, and while the guy distracted them, the friend would steal from nearby tables. If anyone noticed, they'd split up, act like they didn't know each other, and leave the guy sitting there looking guilty. Mia got away that night. They caught her 2 days later using one of the stolen cards at a gas station. The officers took my statement and let me go after confirming I wasn't involved. Walking out of that restaurant felt like walking through a dream. People were still staring as I passed, probably thinking I was part of it. When I got home, I checked my messages. Her dating profile was gone, deleted completely. No trace of her name or photo anywhere. The next week, I saw her mugshot online. The headline said, "Dating Abdu arrested for restaurant thefts." It listed a bunch of cities they'd hit. She looked totally different in the photo. Tired, angry, not the confident girl who smiled at me over pasta. Now, whenever someone says they might bring a friend along on a date, I don't even ask why. I just say no. It was one of those cold nights where the sky looked too clear, like the kind that tricks you into thinking it's peaceful. He picked me up after dinner, still laughing about something the waiter said. The whole date had been fine, nothing amazing but not terrible either. He seemed normal enough, funny, confident, a little full of himself, but in a way that made you think he was just nervous. He said he knew a quiet place where we could talk for a bit. I thought he meant some scenic overlook or park, maybe somewhere to sit and keep chatting before heading home. He didn't sound sketchy. He made it sound casual, like something he'd done 100 times. We drove for a while, past the main roads, past the shops, until the streetlights started getting further apart. He turned down a narrow road lined with trees, the kind that looks harmless in the daytime but feels wrong at night. There were no houses, no parked cars, nothing but the faint hum of the engine and the sound of gravel crunching under the tires. He parked near the edge of a field, cut the engine, and leaned back like it was something he did all the time. The air felt heavy, the kind of silence that makes you more aware of every sound. I tried to keep it light, asked if this was one of his go-to spots. He laughed but didn't answer right away. For a few minutes, it was fine. We talked about random stuff, movies, travel, dumb stories from school. He kept glancing toward the rearview mirror, though, like he was expecting someone to show up. When I asked if he was okay, he said, "Yeah, just making sure no one followed us." I laughed because I thought he was joking, but his expression didn't change. He started acting jumpy. One second he was relaxed. The next he was checking his phone, tapping the steering wheel, looking out the windows. His voice went lower, slower. He said he liked quiet places because no one bothered him there. The way he said it made me uncomfortable, that I didn't want to overthink. Then he turned off the headlights, just total darkness. My first thought was that maybe he was trying to be romantic or something, but the air in the car changed instantly. I could hear my own heartbeat. I remember staring out the windshield and realizing how far we were from the main road. No one would have seen us if something happened. I tried to change the subject, said maybe we should head back because it was getting late. He didn't answer at first. Then he smiled, but it wasn't the same smile from dinner. It looked stretched, forced. He said he just wanted to sit for a bit longer. Right then, a bright light hit the car. White, harsh, cutting through the windows from behind us. It was so sudden that both of us froze. For a second, I thought it was another car, maybe someone else pulling up. But the light didn't move. It stayed fixed, blinding. Then I heard a voice, loud, clear, commanding, telling him to turn off the vehicle and keep his hands where they could see them. I looked at him, confused. He didn't move. His face went blank like his brain just shut off. I thought it had to be some misunderstanding. But before I could even say anything, more lights flicked on, red and blue flashing across the trees. You could hear doors slamming, boots on gravel, voices yelling. He started muttering under his breath, something like "not again" or "they found me." My chest tightened. I didn't even know what was happening. I thought maybe it was a traffic stop gone wrong, but then I saw it, the word "police" printed across one of the vests in the light. A flashlight beam hit my face, and someone shouted for both of us to get out slowly. I did what they said, hands shaking. The cold air hit hard when I opened the door. There were at least 6 officers, all pointing lights and weapons toward the car. They pulled him out first. He didn't resist, just stared at the ground while they cuffed him. I remember one officer saying his name and reading something off a radio. Another one asked if I was with him, if I knew why they were there. I said no, I had no idea. I must have looked terrified because the officer told me to step aside. They searched the car while another officer talked to me. He asked how long I'd known him, where we'd met, what we were doing out there. I told him it was our first date, that we'd gone to dinner, and he wanted to stop somewhere quiet. The officer nodded like he'd heard that story before. Then one of the others called out that they'd found something in the trunk, a box wrapped in duct tape full of random stuff, papers, clothes, and something else that looked like a camera case. One of them said they'd confirmed his ID matched a warrant. That's when the officer told me what was going on. He'd been wanted for multiple counts of indecent exposure and public lewdness. Apparently, he'd been caught more than once, always in quiet spots like that. He'd been using dating apps to lure women into isolated areas, not always to harm them, but to do something inappropriate or expose himself before taking off. They'd been tracking his car for days and waited for him to make another move. I just stood there, my head spinning. They said he'd been warned before, but kept slipping through because he changed cars or moved cities. I was one of the unlucky ones who happened to match with him before they caught up. The officers took my statement while they loaded him into the back of a cruiser. He kept his head down, saying nothing. The same guy who'd been laughing over sushi hours earlier now looked completely different. Empty, like all that fake charm had drained out of him. When they finally let me go, one of the officers offered to escort me back to the main road. I drove home in silence, every sound in the car suddenly louder. The engine, the tires, my heartbeat. I kept replaying the night in my head, every sign I'd missed. The weird comments, the way he kept checking the mirrors, a sudden need to be somewhere dark. Later that night, I Googled his name. The articles were already up. His face in a mugshot, a list of charges underneath. The headline said, "Repeat offender arrested after police sting operation." The words "used dating apps" were right there in the first paragraph. It made me realize how fast things can turn from normal to insane. One second I was sitting in a parked car after dinner. The next I was surrounded by flashing lights and police yelling through megaphones. Now, whenever someone says they know a quiet spot, I make sure I never find out where it is. The night started out normal, good lighting, soft music, and the smell of soy sauce and cooked rice hanging in the air. I'd met her on a dating app a couple of weeks earlier. Her name was Megan, and she came off as this cool, easygoing girl who liked trying new food spots. She was the one who suggested sushi. I wasn't much of a sushi person, but she seemed confident about the place. Said it was her favorite. When I got there, she was already sitting at the table, tucked into the corner booth by the window. She smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't the relaxed kind of smile you expect on a first date. It looked forced, like she was keeping something together. Still, she looked put together, hair neat, simple clothes, polite voice. Everything seemed fine. We ordered drinks and a platter to share. She asked me normal questions, what I did for work, where I was from, how my week had been. But every time I asked about her, her answers were short. She said she worked in communications, whatever that meant, and that her job involved confidential clients. I didn't press her on it. Some people just like keeping work separate. The weird part was how often she glanced around. At first, I thought maybe she was looking for the waiter. But then I realized she was watching people. Her eyes darted from table to table, sometimes pausing at people who weren't even paying attention to us. A family eating near the bar, a couple near the entrance, a guy alone with a laptop. She'd study them for a few seconds, then turn back to me like nothing happened. I tried to joke about her being paranoid, but she didn't laugh. She just smiled like she was distracted. The food came, and she started eating fast, like she was in a hurry. She kept checking her phone at the table. It would light up. She glanced down, typed something quickly, and then go back to eating. I asked if she needed to be somewhere after, and she said no, but her voice was tight. About halfway through the meal, I noticed two men walk in wearing dark jackets. They didn't sit. They scanned the room for a second, then went to the counter and spoke quietly to the hostess. One of them had something clipped to his belt. I thought it was a badge. That's when Megan froze. Chopsticks halfway to her mouth. Her expression changed completely. No more fake smile, no more calm face. She looked terrified. She leaned back slightly, trying to see out the window. I asked if she was okay, but she ignored me completely. Her phone buzzed again, and she looked at it, then at the entrance, then back at her bag on the floor. She started breathing fast. The two men at the front began talking into earpieces. Another one entered through the side door, and I realized they weren't regular police. They were tactical. Plainclothes but armed, the kind you see before something big happens. Within seconds, everything went from normal to chaos. The glass doors slammed open and several more officers came in. Helmets, vests, the whole thing. They spread out, shouting for everyone to stay seated. The entire restaurant froze. People dropped their chopsticks. Kids started crying. Waiters ducked behind the counter. Megan's face went pale. She tried to grab her bag, but one of the officers shouted for her to stop. She froze mid-motion. The next few seconds felt like they stretched forever. The officer closest of us walked forward with his weapon drawn but low. He called her name, her full name, and told her to stand up slowly. She looked at me one last time, eyes wide, and whispered something I couldn't even catch before she put her hands up. They cuffed her right there beside the table while everyone stared. The officers started clearing the restaurant. One of them came up to me and asked if I was with her. I said yes, but it was our first date. He nodded like he'd already guessed that. He told me to stay seated while they checked her things. When they opened her bag, they found 2 phones, several documents, and a small voice recorder. The officer holding it exchanged a look with another one, then said something into his radio. They pulled out a laptop, too, with folders full of files labeled with names and dates. It didn't take long before they escorted her out. As she passed, she kept her head down, hair covering her face. The restaurant was dead silent except for the muffled chatter from the radios. After they took her away, one of the officers came back to talk to me. He asked if I knew who she was or what she did for work. I told him what she'd said. Communications, confidential clients. He sighed and said she wasn't who she claimed to be. She was under investigation for interfering with a federal case. Apparently, she'd been using dating apps to get close to witnesses tied to ongoing trials. She'd meet them casually, take them out, and record their conversations without them knowing. The voice recorder in her bag was still running. She'd been trying to gather information to sell to someone. They'd been tracking her for months, waiting for her to meet her next target. He said I wasn't in trouble, but that they'd need a statement. They took down my name and number, asked how we met, what she'd said, whether I'd seen her talk to anyone else. I told them everything I could remember. After they left, the restaurant slowly went back to life. People whispered, waiters started cleaning tables again, and someone made a joke to break the tension. I just sat there, staring at the untouched sushi rolls between us. Her drink was still half full, the ice melted. When I finally got up to leave, I noticed her phone on the bench beside me. It must have fallen when they cuffed her. The screen was cracked, but the notifications were still lighting up. Messages from unknown numbers. Just one word repeated over and over. Status. I left it there. Later that night, I searched her name online. Nothing came up at first, but a few days later, a short article appeared about a woman arrested for obstructing justice. It mentioned she'd been part of a group using social media to approach potential witnesses and gather evidence illegally. No photo, no full name, just a short paragraph buried in the crime section. I kept thinking about the way she'd looked around that night, the way she'd studied people in the restaurant like she was expecting someone to walk in any second. She must have known they were closing in on her. Maybe that's why she agreed to the date, to keep up appearances one last normal night before everything crashed. The weirdest part is that if the police hadn't come when they did, I would have had no idea. I would have sat there, thinking she was just shy or anxious while she recorded every word I said. Now, whenever someone I meet online suggests a specific restaurant or says they have a confidential job, I can't help but think about that night. About how calm she looked right before everything went down, eating sushi like nothing was wrong while an entire SWAT team was already outside. It was supposed to be one of those easy, low-pressure first dates. Nothing fancy, just a casual dinner at a local restaurant that everyone in town seemed to love. He picked the place, said it had the best pasta in the city, and that he'd been going there for years. He sounded confident about it, like he'd been saving it for someone special. That kind of confidence made me think he was decent, grounded, maybe a little old-fashioned in a good way. When I walked in, he was already sitting near the window, waving with that relaxed grin people have when they've been waiting but don't want to seem too eager. He stood to greet me, pulled out my chair, and everything about his body language screamed normal. He was polite, not overly flirty, and easy to talk to. He told me he worked in currency trading. I didn't know much about that world, but it sounded smart, kind of mysterious, like he understood how money worked in ways most people didn't. He said he had clients overseas and sometimes worked with rare notes and collectibles. It all sounded professional, and he talked about it in such detail that I didn't question any of it. Dinner started off great. We ordered drinks, shared starters, and laughed about how awkward first dates usually were. He was smooth but not creepy, charming without trying too hard. Every time I looked up, he was already looking at me, but in a warm, not weird way. But about halfway through the meal, I started noticing little things that didn't add up. When the waiter brought the bill for the drinks, he pulled out a thick wallet. It was stuffed, like way too thick for a normal wallet. When he took out some cash to pay, I noticed the bills looked off. The color was duller, the texture weird. It might have just been the lighting, but something about it didn't seem right. He paid, handed the waiter a few notes, and went back to talking like nothing happened. The waiter looked at the money for a moment too long before walking away. I caught it but didn't say anything. I figured maybe he used foreign currency or something, since he worked with rare notes. A few minutes later, he excused himself to go to the bathroom. He smiled, said not to order dessert without him, and walked off. I checked my phone, scrolled through messages, and waited. A couple of songs passed, then another 5 minutes. I started wondering if he was okay. I looked toward the bathrooms, expecting to see him walking back, but he didn't. I tried to stay calm, thinking maybe there was a line or he was making a phone call. 10 minutes went by, then 15. The waiter came over to check on us and looked surprised that he still wasn't back. That's when the noise started, shouting from the back hallway near the restrooms, chairs scraping, heavy footsteps. The sound of something hitting the floor. The whole restaurant went quiet. A few people turned to look, whispering. I stood up, peeking over the divider. 2 men in plain clothes were pushing through the corridor, followed by a uniformed officer. They disappeared around the corner. A moment later, I saw him, my date, being dragged out, arms behind his back, handcuffed. He looked pale and completely different from the calm, confident guy I'd been sitting with 10 minutes ago. Everyone stared as they pulled him toward the exit. One of the plainclothes officers held up a small black duffel bag that must have been his. I heard the word counterfeit somewhere in the noise. My heart started racing. I just stood there, frozen halfway between the table and the door, not sure if I should follow or pretend I didn't know him. The waiter came over to me quietly and said they needed to speak with me. My legs felt like they weren't working, but I followed him to the back. They'd taken him outside already, but 2 officers stayed behind to talk to the restaurant manager. On the counter near the register were the same notes he used to pay for our drinks, only now they were sealed in a plastic evidence bag. The color was wrong, the texture too smooth. Fake money. One officer asked me if I knew him well. I said no, that it was our first date. He nodded like he'd heard that answer 100 times before. He explained that they'd been tracking him for a while. He was suspected of circulating counterfeit cash around multiple restaurants and bars in the city. He'd pay with fake money, keep the real change, and vanish before anyone caught on. Tonight, the staff recognized the pattern and quietly called the police. Apparently, when he went to the bathroom, he'd been trying to stash more of the fake bills in the trash to get rid of evidence. They caught him mid-act. I didn't know what to say. I just kept repeating that I had no idea. The officer asked if he'd mentioned work, and I told him about the currency trading story. The officer almost laughed. He said that was his go-to line. Every time he got caught, he claimed he was a collector or a dealer, and that people were just too uneducated to understand what real currency looked like. They let me sit down while they finished collecting evidence. His wallet was now open on the table, and inside were dozens of folded bills, some with serial numbers repeating, some with blank corners. He must have had thousands worth of fake money in there. The restaurant started buzzing again once the police took him out. People were whispering, a few even filming as they led him away. The waiter looked over at me and gave this awkward half smile like he didn't know whether to feel bad for me or warn me to never trust anyone again. I paid for my meal, this time with my own card, and left as quietly as I could. Outside, I saw the flashing lights bouncing off the wet pavement. They were putting him in the back of the police car, his head down, his jacket soaked from the rain. He didn't look up once. Later that night, I checked the local news out of curiosity, and there it was, a small article about a man arrested at a restaurant for possession of counterfeit cash. It said he'd been under investigation for months and was linked to multiple cases across the city. The article didn't mention his name, but I didn't need it. I recognized the jacket, the place, the time. I kept thinking back to how confident he'd seemed at the start. The way he told me to order whatever I wanted, how easily he handed the waiter the money. It was all an act. He must have done it so many times that it felt routine. He probably thought he'd get through another night without getting caught. What gets me is how normal it all felt up until that moment. I'd been sitting across from someone who was committing a crime in real time, and I didn't notice. I didn't even suspect anything beyond a bad texture on a bill. When people talk about bad dates, they usually mean someone rude or awkward, not someone who gets arrested 10 feet away from the bathroom while you're still deciding what dessert to order. She looked nervous from the moment she walked in. I thought maybe she just wasn't used to meeting people in person, or maybe the restaurant made her uncomfortable. She kept glancing over her shoulder, checking her phone, tapping her fingers on the table. It was like her brain was somewhere else entirely. I tried to make conversation, tried to get her to relax, but her attention kept drifting to the door every few minutes. We met online a couple of weeks before. Her name was Emily. She had that friendly, almost shy personality that made her seem harmless. She worked in finance, she said, but didn't really go into detail. I figured she meant something boring like accounting. She was funny over text, smart, and always the one to start conversations. That made me think she was confident, but seeing her in person was a totally different story. We met at a quiet restaurant near the train station. She'd chosen it herself. When I got there, she was already sitting down, a black handbag beside her and a large brown envelope under it. I noticed it right away because it looked too bulky to just be papers. I didn't ask, though. It wasn't my business. She smiled when she saw me, but it looked forced. Her hands were shaking slightly when she picked up her drink. She said she'd had a stressful day and was just tired. I believed her. Everyone looks tense after work. For the first 20 minutes, I kept trying to make small talk, stuff about travel, food, music, but she wasn't really listening. Her eyes would dart toward the window every time someone walked by. I asked if she wanted to leave or go somewhere quieter, but she said she was fine, just distracted. I started to think she might be waiting for someone. At one point, her phone buzzed and she froze mid-sentence. She looked at the screen for a long time without touching it, then turned it over and slid it into her bag. Her face went pale. I thought it might be an ex texting her or some kind of bad news. She forced a smile and said everything was fine, but her voice cracked a little. The waiter came by to take our order, and she jumped like she'd been caught doing something wrong. She apologized 3 times for no reason. That's when I started getting uncomfortable. Her anxiety was contagious. It made me tense without knowing why. When the food came, she barely touched hers. I tried to keep the conversation going, but it felt one-sided. She'd zone out for a few seconds, then snap back like she remembered she was supposed to be there. She kept her handbag on her lap the entire time. She wouldn't even put it down on the seat. The envelope stayed tucked between her and the wall. I started wondering if she was hiding something. Drugs, maybe? Money? I told myself I was being paranoid. Then she suddenly smiled again, like she was trying too hard to act normal. She said she was finally starting to relax and even made a joke about how awkward she must have looked. It was the first moment the night felt semi-normal. She asked if I wanted dessert, and I said sure. I figured maybe things were turning around. While we waited, she excused herself to go to the bathroom. She left her bag and the envelope behind. A few minutes passed, and that's when everything changed. 3 men walked into the restaurant together, 2 in plain clothes, one wearing a jacket with some kind of badge on it. They weren't loud, but everyone noticed them right away. They looked serious, scanning the room like they were looking for someone. My stomach tightened because for a split second, I thought they might be after me even though I'd done nothing wrong. Then one of them pointed toward my table. The waiter came over, confused, and one of the men flashed something that looked like police ID. They headed straight toward me. The whole place went quiet, except for the sound of silverware clinking. I sat frozen, my hands still on my glass. The first guy asked if I was there with someone named Emily. I said yes, she'd just gone to the bathroom. He nodded and told me to stay seated. His tone wasn't aggressive, but firm enough that I didn't argue. The other 2 positioned themselves near the exit. Then one leaned over the table and looked at the bag next to me. He asked if it was mine. I said no, it was hers. He told me not to touch it. A minute later, she came out of the bathroom, and the second she saw them, she froze. Her whole expression changed. She didn't even try to act surprised. She just whispered something under her breath, turned like she might bolt, but one of the officers was already behind her. They told her to stay where she was and placed her in handcuffs right there in front of everyone. People started whispering, phones coming out. I just sat there, completely lost, staring at her bag and that thick brown envelope. They led her to the table. One officer opened the envelope and dumped the contents out carefully. It wasn't papers. It was dozens of fake IDs, driver's licenses, and credit cards. Some with her face, some with other women's. Stacks of them. All different names. The officer said they'd been tracking her for months for large-scale identity fraud. She didn't say a word. She just stared at the table, breathing hard. The one who'd been talking to me explained that she'd been meeting people online under fake names, using them as cover while she made drops and exchanged documents. I was apparently just the normal date she set up to make it look like she was living a regular life. She'd been under surveillance, and this was their move to arrest her quietly. I couldn't even process it. I looked at the pile of IDs, hundreds of people's names, faces, numbers. It didn't feel real. They'd caught her red-handed and had been sitting there the whole time next to 50,000 pounds worth of stolen identity cards. As they walked her out, she turned back once, eyes wide and empty. It wasn't anger or guilt, just shock that it was finally over. She didn't say anything to me. After they left, one of the officers stayed behind to take my statement. He told me I wasn't in trouble, but I needed to explain how I met her and what she'd said to me that night. He showed me photos from her phone, different versions of her using wigs, glasses, different names on dating apps. They said she'd scammed banks, forged documents, and even faked her own work ID. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Everyone just stared. After the police left, the waiter came over slowly and asked if I still wanted dessert. I said no. I just paid my bill and walked out, trying to remember every detail of the night. The street outside looked too normal for what had just happened. Later that night, I searched her name online. Nothing came up. No arrests. No mugshot. Nothing. I guess that makes sense if it wasn't her real name. The photo on her profile was still there, smiling, pretending to be someone she never was. It's weird thinking I sat across from someone running an entire double life. She looked scared the whole time, and now I understand why. I was never supposed to be part of that night. I was just the cover story that ended up at the wrong table. He said he was into photography. Not in the I just got a camera and take pictures of sunsets way. He talked about it like it was a real passion. He sent me a few of his photos before our date, and they actually looked good. Clean edits, cool lighting, nothing sketchy. He said he liked capturing real moments, whatever that meant. He seemed chill, quiet, kind of artsy in a mysterious way. When he asked to meet at the mall for coffee and maybe take a few pictures for his photo project, I didn't think it was that weird. Public place, lots of people, it felt safe. The mall was busy that afternoon. People everywhere, music coming from different stores, the smell of pretzels and perfume mixing in the air. I got there early and sat near the fountain. He showed up right on time, carrying a camera bag and wearing this faded denim jacket that looked like it had stories. He smiled when he saw me, small, confident, not over the top. We grabbed coffee first. He was polite, funny in a quiet way, and he talked a lot about how he liked photographing strangers who don't know they're being watched. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but then he said that was what made people look the most natural. He said he was trying to build a collection of unfiltered beauty. It sounded strange, but artsy people say strange things all the time. After coffee, he asked if I wanted to see the spot where he liked to take pictures. It was on the top floor near an empty clothing store that had gone out of business. I agreed. The area was quieter there, just a few people walking by, the kind of corner you wouldn't notice unless someone pointed it out. He unpacked his camera and started adjusting the lens. He asked if I'd stand near the railing where the light hit better. I said sure. He didn't touch me or act creepy, just kept giving small directions like tilt your head, look away, hold the cup higher. He took a few shots and showed me the screen. They actually looked nice. I relaxed a bit. Then he said he wanted to try something more candid. He told me to just walk toward the escalator while he snapped from behind. I turned around to start walking, and that's when I noticed two security guards standing near the other side of the balcony. They weren't looking at me. They were watching him. At first, I thought they were just being cautious. People take pictures in malls all the time, and security can be strict about that. But one of them started talking into his radio, and the other began walking toward us. My stomach dropped. I turned back to him, and he looked completely calm, like he didn't even notice what was happening. The guard called out to him, asking if he had a permit to be taking photos. He froze for a second, then said he was just doing a small project. The guard asked him to stop and show some ID. That's when everything shifted. His calmness cracked. He started backing up slowly, saying it was a misunderstanding. The second guard joined in, blocking the exit. People nearby started staring. A woman pushing a stroller stopped mid-step. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, holding my coffee, feeling completely out of place. The guard told me to step aside. They surrounded him and asked to see his camera. He refused at first, clutching it like it was something sacred. Then suddenly, one of the guards reached for it, and he snapped. He started yelling that they couldn't take his work, that they were ruining months of effort. The whole place went quiet, except for his voice echoing across the floor. Within seconds, 2 more guards showed up and took the camera from his hands. He tried to grab it back. They held him down until he stopped struggling. They opened the camera right there. One guard took out the memory card, looked at the screen, then looked at me. His expression completely changed. He called for someone on his radio again, quieter this time. I asked what was going on, but no one answered. A few minutes later, mall police came. They led him away, still yelling about his photos. One of the officers asked me to come with them for a statement. We went into one of those small security rooms with cameras everywhere. They asked how I knew him, how long we'd been talking, and if I knew what kind of photos he took. I said we'd met online, that he said he was doing a project about unfiltered moments. The guard who checked his camera shook his head. He said the card was full of videos, hundreds of them. Hidden camera clips of women in dressing rooms, sitting at food courts, walking through the mall. Some looked scared, like they'd noticed something but didn't know what. There were even pictures of me from earlier before I met him by the fountain. I hadn't even seen him there, but apparently he'd been filming the whole time. They said he'd been doing it for years, going from mall to mall, pretending to be a photographer. He'd charm people into posing, then secretly record others in the background. Security had been trying to catch him for months, but never got close enough. Someone recognized him on the cameras that day, which is why they moved in so fast. When they searched his bag, they found multiple hidden lenses and a small button camera clipped to his shirt. He hadn't just been taking photos with the big camera. He'd been recording everything, including me, the entire time. The officer told me I'd done nothing wrong, that I was probably just the bait for his next set of clips. I felt sick. The idea that he'd been planning it all before I even showed up made my skin crawl. They let me leave after taking my contact info in case they needed more questions later. As I walked back through the mall, everything looked different. The people, the noise, the lights, it all felt fake, like I was still part of some staged video. I passed the spot where he'd taken my picture, and for a second, I imagined him standing there again, smiling like nothing was wrong. When I got home, I blocked his number and deleted every message. But later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the photos he'd shown me before we met. The ones he'd sent as proof of his work. I started wondering if any of those models even knew they were in them, or if they were just like me, smiling for a camera they thought was harmless. The next day, there was a short article online about an arrest at the mall. It mentioned a man accused of recording hundreds of women without consent. It said the footage was being used as evidence for multiple cases. No names, no pictures, just that one line that said, "The investigation is ongoing." I kept staring at that sentence, realizing I'd been one more person in his collection. Not special, not chosen, just next. It started like one of those chill, low-stress dates that actually sound better than going somewhere fancy. She said she wanted to keep it simple. Just takeout, some music, maybe a movie at her place. She seemed normal, funny, talkative, not weirdly intense like some people online. She mentioned her brother a few times while we were texting, saying they were close, that he might drop by to grab something later. I didn't think twice. Her apartment was on the top floor of an older building downtown. Not run down, just small. The kind of place that smells like candles and takeout. When I got there, she was already barefoot, hair tied up, music low. She ordered pizza and drinks ready. The whole thing felt comfortable. She had that laid-back energy that makes you feel like you've known someone for a while. We sat on the couch, eating and talking about random stuff. Work, old movies, dumb internet trends. The vibe was easy. I wasn't nervous anymore, which never happens on first dates. After about an hour, she got up to grab another drink and mentioned again that her brother might stop by soon. She said he was always showing up unannounced. I laughed, said that was fine, didn't bother me. A few minutes later, she walked into the kitchen to get more ice. That's when I noticed something weird. The front door had a chain lock, but it was still hanging open, like she'd unlatched it earlier and never hooked it back. The blinds by the window were half closed, and there was a shadow moving faintly behind them. I thought maybe it was just a tree branch or someone walking past, but the apartment was on the 3rd floor. There wasn't supposed to be anyone outside the window. I heard her phone buzz on the counter. A message popped up, and I didn't mean to read it, but it was right there. It said window, just that word, nothing else. She came back with the drinks, acting totally normal. I asked her if her brother was still coming, and she said, yeah, probably soon. I tried to sound casual, but something in my gut was starting to twist. A few minutes later, there was a noise, soft, like metal scraping glass. Then it happened again, louder this time. I looked toward the window, and I swear I saw the faint outline of someone outside. She didn't react at all. She just kept talking, pretending not to hear it. Then the window slid open, slowly, like someone trying not to make a sound. Before I could even stand up, a vat climbed in, dark hoodie, gloves, and a gun in his hand. My heart stopped. She didn't scream. She didn't even flinch. She looked at him like she'd been waiting for it. He looked at me, then at her, and said something low I couldn't make out. She nodded. I realized then that he wasn't breaking it. He was part of whatever this was. She planned it. He started checking the drawers near the TV stand, going through her stuff like he knew exactly where to look. He wasn't panicking, just fast and focused. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was stuck halfway between standing and sitting, my body locked out completely. She turned to me, calm as ever, and told me to stay still. Not loud, not mean, just firm. Her tone wasn't scared. It was like she was managing the situation. The guy moved into the hallway and started going through the bedroom. You could hear the drawers slamming, bags zipping, something falling. Then I realized what was happening. It wasn't her stuff he was taking. He was taking mine. My jacket was hanging on the chair, my wallet and keys in the pocket. My phone was charging by the couch. She'd set me up. It hit me like a wave of cold. She'd picked me because she needed a distraction. Someone to bring to the apartment so neighbors wouldn't think anything was weird. While I was sitting there eating pizza, they were staging a burglary. I tried to grab my phone, but she moved fast. She stood between me and the charger, holding out her hand like she was warning me not to try it. Her face didn't look friendly anymore. It was blank, completely emotionless. The guy came back from the bedroom with a duffel bag. He handed her something small, looked like a watch, maybe jewelry, and then started toward the window again. That's when the sound of sirens came from outside. They both froze. She looked at him, then back at me. He muttered something and went straight for the window. I thought he was going to jump out, but before he could, there was pounding on the front door. Loud, fast, police pounding. She snapped, grabbed the duffel bag, tried to shove it under the couch. He turned back to her, whispering something harsh, but then the cops started yelling for them to open up. They both panicked. She ran for the door as she was going to talk her way out. Before she could even touch it, the door burst open. Cops flooded in. Guns drawn, yelling commands. Everything happened in seconds. He tried to climb back through the window, but got tackled halfway. She dropped to the floor, hands up, shouting that it wasn't what it looked like. One of the officers pulled me up and asked if I was hurt. I could barely talk. I just pointed at them, still sitting there stunned. They cuffed both of them and started reading out rights, the whole scene loud and chaotic. Turns out the police had already been watching them. They'd been hitting apartments around the area for weeks, setting up fake dates through apps, using the victims as cover. They'd get someone to come over, keep them distracted, then the brother would rob the place. I just happened to be the one where everything went wrong. They found stolen stuff in her closet and bags with IDs and cards from other people. They said they'd been close to catching them, but didn't know what apartment they were using until that night. Someone in the building had reported suspicious activity earlier, which is why the cops showed up so fast. I gave my statement, told them everything I could remember. They returned my wallet later that night. I couldn't even look at it without thinking about how close I came to walking straight into something way worse. It still doesn't feel real sometimes. The way she smiled at me when I got there, the way everything seemed so normal. If you'd looked at us from outside, it would have looked like a regular date. Music, food, a quiet apartment. No one would guess there was a man waiting outside the window with a gun. I never saw her again after that. I read about the case a few months later. They both got charged. She was apparently the one who found all the victims online. I still don't know if she ever picked me specifically or if I was just next on the list. Now whenever someone mentions having family nearby or says someone might drop by, I always say no. He insisted we meet at his favorite bar. Said it was his go-to spot, the kind of place that knew his drink by heart. He sounded proud of it, like it wasn't just a hangout but part of his identity. I didn't think twice about it. People talk like that about their favorite coffee shops all the time. I figured it'd be a cozy, low-key first date. It was raining that night, not heavily, just that cold drizzle that makes everything look shiny and tired. The place was tucked between a tattoo studio and a vape shop, with a faded neon sign that flickered every few seconds. Inside, it was dim, kind of grimy, but not in a dangerous way, just worn down, like it had been open too long. He was already sitting at the bar when I got there, waving me over with a grin. He looked normal enough, jeans, dark shirt, a little overdressed for the place. The bartender glanced at me, then at him, then went back to wiping glasses. I didn't think much of it at first. We ordered drinks. He insisted on paying. I tried to be polite, said I could cover mine, but he laughed it off. The bartender didn't even look at him while pouring the drinks, just set them down and walked off fast. The energy felt weird. You could tell when people in a room share a secret you're not part of. I tried to keep the conversation light. He talked about work, said he was in marketing, but never really explained what that meant. His answers were short and vague, like he was keeping the details blurry on purpose. I started to notice people at the other end of the bar staring. Not casually, just watching him with this cold, quiet hate. He didn't notice, or maybe he did and didn't care. He kept talking, laughing too loud. When I took a sip of my drink, I noticed the bartender had been watching me closely from the corner of his eye. Then, without saying a word, he came over and replaced my glass with a fresh one. He said something about mixing the wrong order. I thanked him, but his tone wasn't casual, it was sharp. That's when things started to feel wrong. Every time the guy left to use the bathroom or check his phone, I could feel eyes on me. One woman leaned in slightly like she wanted to say something but didn't. The air in that place felt heavy, quiet between songs on the jukebox. I noticed one man near the door texting fast, glancing between his phone and the bar. He came back and started joking again, asking if I was having fun. I nodded, pretending to smile, but I could feel my stomach twisting. I noticed the bartender whispering to one of the waitresses, who looked over at me, then nodded and disappeared into the back room. I kept checking the clock above the bar, trying to come up with an excuse to leave. But then the bartender leaned over and said something quietly to the guy. His whole face changed. He slammed his drink down and muttered under his breath. The bartender didn't flinch, just folded his arms and stood there. A few seconds later, the front doors opened, and 2 police officers walked in. The whole room went silent. Even the jukebox stopped between songs. The officers didn't draw their weapons or shout. They just walked straight up to him. One of them said his name, calm but firm. He froze. Then he turned to me with this weird half-smile like he was trying to pretend it was all a misunderstanding. He said everything was fine, that they were making a mistake. The bartender didn't move. He just said, "You're done here." They cuffed him right there at the bar. He didn't fight, didn't say anything else, just kept his head down. People in the room started whispering, and one woman said something like, "Finally." I sat there in shock, not even sure what to do. One of the officers came over and asked if I was with him. I said yes, kind of automatically, but the words felt wrong as soon as they left my mouth. They asked me how long I'd known him, if I'd had anything to drink from him directly. That question made my blood run cold. I told him he bought my drink, but the bartender had replaced it before I finished it. The officer nodded like he already knew that part. He told me to stay seated for a minute. When they walked him out, the entire bar watched. Nobody said anything. It was a kind of silence that tells you everyone already knew who he was and what he'd done. After they left, the bartender came over, sat across from me, and said he'd seen him before. Said he'd been banned months ago. Apparently, the guy had a reputation for drugging people's drinks. mostly dates he brought there. The last time, someone had ended up in the hospital. They'd warned him never to come back, but he kept trying to sneak in with different people. My stomach dropped. The bartender said he recognized him as soon as he walked in and called the police right away. He said they'd been waiting for him to make a move. When he saw the guy buy my drink, he switched it before I could touch it again. That's why everyone was staring. They were waiting to make sure I didn't drink it. I just sat there, staring at the half-empty glass on the counter, realizing how close that had been. The bartender said they'd already found traces of something in the bottles he touched before they stopped him last time. The weird part was how casual it all seemed after. The music started playing again, people went back to talking, but everything felt off. I thanked the bartender, paid for my drink anyway, and left. The rain was still coming down outside, cold and steady. When I got home, I looked up his name. The arrest record came up within minutes. He'd been charged multiple times before for possession and assault. There were news articles about his earlier victims, stories about how he targeted women through dating apps, always insisting they meet at the same bar. I recognized the one from the photos, the same flickering neon sign. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about how normal he'd seemed, how comfortable he looked sitting there, joking like it was just another date. I keep wondering how many people before me thought the same thing, that it was just another night, another drink, another stranger trying to impress them. Now, whenever someone says they have a favorite place, I don't ask where. I just say we'll meet somewhere new. She told me she ran a small business, and that instantly made her sound more interesting than anyone else I'd talked to online. She wasn't one of those people who said, "I'm still figuring it out." She said she built something from the ground up, that she had a team and clients. The way she talked about it made her sound successful. She had confidence, like someone who knew exactly what she wanted. She said she wanted to meet at a nice restaurant in the city so she could celebrate a recent deal. It sounded professional but casual enough for a first date, so I said yes. The place was fancier than I expected, low lights, soft jazz, waiters moving quietly between tables. She was already there when I arrived, wearing a blazer over a dress, her hair tied back like she just left a meeting. She smiled when she saw me and said she'd already ordered drinks. She had that calm, controlled energy that made you want to impress her. At first, everything was normal. We talked about random things, work, family, travel. She said she sold lifestyle products, but she was vague about what that meant. Every time I asked what kind, she'd say it was easier to show me than to explain. I didn't think much of it. Some people don't like giving away too much about their job on a first date. After about 20 minutes, a group of people walked in, 2 women and 3 men all around her age. She waved at them, and they waved back. Then she told me those were her employees, that they'd just come from a meeting nearby and might join us later for a drink. I thought it was weird to mix a date with work people, but I tried to stay polite. The waiter came over with a bottle of wine, and she poured me a glass herself. Then she started talking more about her business. She said it was a community-based opportunity where people could build their own future. That was the first red flag. It sounded rehearsed, like something you'd hear in a seminar. She talked about growth, leadership, and mentorship programs. Then she pulled out a small folder from her bag and started showing me pictures of product displays and group events. It looked like sales conventions, people in suits clapping in hotel ballrooms. I realized then it wasn't a normal small business. It was one of those pyramid-style setups. I tried to stay polite, but she noticed I wasn't reacting the way she wanted. She leaned forward and said she wasn't looking to recruit me. She just wanted to show me what she was passionate about. While she was talking, her employees started sitting down at nearby tables. Not right next to us, but close enough to listen. They all ordered drinks at the same time, kept glancing over, and nodded every time she said something about teamwork or financial freedom. It felt like they were part of the presentation. Then, without warning, she changed the tone completely. She said she wanted to make me an offer. She said she thought I had potential and could join her team. I tried to laugh it off, saying I wasn't really into that kind of thing, but she didn't drop it. She said this wasn't like other companies, that it was real ownership. Her employees kept watching me. I could feel their eyes every time I picked up my glass. She slid a contract across the table, a real printed document. It had spaces for a name, bank info, and a starter fee. I told her I wasn't interested, but she didn't back off. She said it was the easiest decision I'd ever make. Her voice was still calm, but her eyes were different now, colder, focused. That's when one of the guys at the nearby table stood up and walked over. He smiled at her and said something quietly, then looked at me like he was checking me out for the first time. Two more of them got up, pretending to fix their jackets, and started standing near the exits. It didn't look like an accident anymore. I asked her what was going on, but she just told me not to worry, that they were part of the team. Then, out of nowhere, two men from another table stood up and flashed badges. They weren't part of her group. They were plainclothes officers. Everything happened so fast that I barely processed it. The one near the door shouted something about nobody leaving. Another officer came through the front entrance, and the restaurant went dead silent. The employees started panicking. One of the women tried to grab the folder from the table, but an officer blocked her. Another man bolted toward the kitchen, but got stopped halfway. The police started ordering them to sit down. I just sat frozen, staring at the half-empty wine glass in front of me. They cuffed her first. She didn't resist, just sat still while they told her she was being arrested. She kept saying it was all a misunderstanding, that she was running a legitimate business. The officers started collecting papers, phones, even her laptop bag. One of them turned to me and asked if I was a customer or part of her organization. I said I was just her date. He nodded like he'd heard that before. Apparently, the whole thing had been part of an undercover sting. The police had been tracking her for months. Her business was a front for a large pyramid operation that had taken money from hundreds of people. The employees weren't real staff. They were recruiters who had no idea they were being watched. The customers at the tables around us were actually undercover officers. They'd been waiting for her to start her pitch before stepping in. When they let her out, she turned to me and said it wasn't what it looked like. Her voice cracked a little, but she didn't cry. She looked embarrassed, not sorry. I just sat there while everyone else stared. The waiter came over later and asked if I was okay, then quietly removed her glass from the table. I stayed for a bit while they took statements. One officer asked me how I'd met her, what she'd said about her job, and if she ever asked me to invest money before. I told him everything. He said she probably targeted me as a potential recruit because they'd seen her messaging multiple people the same way. When I finally left the restaurant, there were still police cars outside, their lights reflecting off the windows. They were taking boxes of files from the trunk of a car that must have been hers. I remember walking past the flashing lights, thinking about how close I'd come to signing something just to be polite. The next morning, there was already an article about it online. Local woman arrested for fraudulent business scheme. Her photo was right there, the same one from her dating profile. The comments under the post were full of people saying they'd met her too, that she promised them financial freedom and disappeared with their money. I deleted her number right after, but the weirdest part is how normal she'd seemed up until that moment. Calm, confident, professional. She made it sound like she had everything figured out. Maybe she really believed she did, until the whole thing caught up with her in the middle of a first date. It started out as one of those easygoing first dates you don't expect much from. He seemed like a normal guy, funny, laid back, the kind who doesn't try too hard. We'd been talking for a week, and when he suggested bowling, I thought it was kind of refreshing. Not dinner, not a movie, just something casual where I could actually tell what kind of person he was. He picked me up in this beat-up silver car that smelled like air freshener and fast food. The radio was playing quietly, and he kept tapping the steering wheel like he was nervous. I figured maybe it was just first date jitters. He cracked jokes the whole ride there, told me he was not that good at bowling but wanted to give it a shot. He had that easy charm people have when they've done this before, like he knew how to make people comfortable fast. The bowling alley was the kind of place that felt frozen in time. Sticky floors, flashing neon lights, old posters on the wall. The smell of popcorn and spray shoes hit me right away. It was busy, full of groups of friends and kids yelling near the arcade. I remember thinking it was nice being somewhere loud. It took the pressure off. He went up to the counter to pay for the lane while I picked out a ball. I didn't think anything of it at first, but when he came back, he looked slightly tense. Not angry, just like something was off. I asked if everything was okay, and he laughed and said it was fine. We started bowling, and for the first 20 minutes, it was normal. He joked about how bad he was, pretending to celebrate every time he knocked down even one pin. He wasn't creepy or awkward, just normal. But every time he'd go up to pay for something, like drinks or extra games, he'd glance around too much. His eyes would dart toward the entrance, the employees, even the ceiling cameras. At one point, when we went to grab a snack, I noticed the cashier look at him weirdly after he handed over his card. She scanned it, hesitated, then forced a smile and handed it back. He turned to me and whispered to act normal. I laughed at first, thinking he was joking, but he didn't smile back. He said it again, slower this time. I asked what he meant, but he just ignored the question and told me to sit down. I tried to brush it off, but my stomach started tightening. Something about his tone didn't sound right. He was still trying to act casual, laughing too much, saying random things that didn't make sense. I kept checking the front counter because the staff seemed tense. One of them was talking on the phone, glancing at our lane. I thought maybe they were dealing with some customer problem, but then I saw her pointing slightly toward us. That's when it really hit me that something wasn't right. The music kept playing, and people around us were still having fun, but everything in my head started moving slower. I told him I was going to the bathroom, and he grabbed my wrist lightly, not tight, just enough to stop me. He said to stay. He said it was handled. My pulse started racing. He smiled again, but it wasn't the same smile as before. It looked forced, shaky. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to make a scene, especially since I didn't even know what was going on yet. I figured I'd wait for a few minutes, then quietly slip out. Then I heard the sound of sirens outside, faint, but getting closer. The arcade lights flashed in rhythm with a red and blue reflection bouncing off the glass doors. The air in the room changed. You could feel everyone slowly realizing something was happening. He saw the lights before I did. His face went pale, completely still. I asked what was going on, and he said, almost under his breath, that he just needed me to act normal. The way he said it made my skin crawl. Calm, almost gentle, like he'd rehearsed it before. Before I could even stand up, 2 officers walked in through the main doors. They didn't shout or make a scene. One of them talked quietly to the manager, who pointed directly at our lane. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. He muttered something about them overreacting and that he'd fix it. They started walking toward us, one hand on their radios, one near their belts. People began watching. I stood up and stepped back a little, trying to make space between us. The officers told him to come with them. He didn't fight, didn't even argue. He just nodded, put his hands up, and went quietly. I remember the whole place going silent, except for the sound of the bowling balls still rolling down the lanes for people who hadn't realized what was happening yet. As they were walking him out, the manager looked right at me and asked if I was with him. I said yes, but I didn't know what was going on. The officer turned to me and said they needed to ask a few questions. I followed them to the side, my legs shaking so hard I could barely stand still. They asked if I knew him well. I said it was our first date. They looked at each other like that made sense. One of them said the card he used to pay for everything was stolen earlier that day from a wallet taken in a nearby shopping center. They said he'd been flagged after the second transaction when the card's owner reported it missing. I didn't even know what to say. I just kept repeating that I didn't know, that I'd just met him. They took my ID, wrote down my information, and told me I was free to go. He didn't look back once when they put him in the car. When I finally got to my car, I sat there for almost 20 minutes before driving off. I kept thinking about how casual he'd been the whole night, like this was normal for him, like he'd done it before. Later that night, I searched his name online. Nothing came up at first, but then I found a local arrest record from a few months back. Same name, same face. He'd been arrested for credit card fraud before. The date listed was only 6 months earlier. That's when I realized he probably didn't even have a real job, or a real car, or maybe even a real name. Everything he'd told me could have been fake. The card, the bowling, the easy charm. It was all part of something he was used to doing. Now, whenever someone suggests meeting in public for a fun date, I still agree. But I drive myself, I pay for myself, and I never let anyone pick the place without me checking first. Because it's one thing to go on a bad date. It's another to sit there laughing with someone while they're already planning how to cover their tracks. She texted me the idea on a random Wednesday night, said she wanted to do something different for our first date. Not dinner, not a movie, Not even drinks. A picnic. At night. She said there was a park just outside town where you could see the stars perfectly. No city lights. No people. At first, I thought she was joking. A picnic at night sounded kind of sketchy, but she sounded so confident about it that I agreed. She said she'd bring food. I just needed to show up. I'd only been talking to her for a week. Her name was Emma. She seemed normal. She posted about her dog, her hiking trips, random nature stuff. We hadn't met in person yet, but she seemed real enough. She said she liked peace and quiet, that she hated crowded places. I figured it'd be chill, something different, like she said. The drive there was longer than I expected. It was one of those half-abandoned roads that barely had any streetlights, the kind where your headlights only catch glimpses of the trees before it goes pitch black again. The GPS said the park was about 10 minutes off the main road. When I turned onto the dirt trail, it was dead silent except for gravel crunching under the tires. I started getting a bad feeling when I didn't see her car anywhere. She'd said she'd get there early to set things up. I texted her to ask where she was, but she didn't reply. Then I saw flashing blue lights through the trees. For a second, I thought it was her, maybe she'd gotten pulled over or something. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't just one car. It was at least three. Police lights flickering between the trees, shadows moving, radios crackling. I slowed down, confused. There were officers spread out near the trailhead, some walking through the woods with flashlights. They had tape stretched across part of the path, blocking it off. I pulled over, rolled down my window, and one of them walked up to me. He asked if I was there for the park, and I said yeah, that I was supposed to meet someone. He told me the area was closed off for an investigation and asked for the person's name. When I said, Emma, he stopped writing for a second and looked at me. He didn't say much, just told me to wait. 2 other officers came over, whispering to each other, glancing between me and their radios. One of them asked how I knew her. I said we'd met online, that it was supposed to be our first date. He nodded like he'd heard that before and then told me to stay in the car. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes watching them move through the trees with flashlights. It looked like something out of a crime show. Then in the distance, I noticed a tow truck slowly backing up toward the woods. I couldn't see what it was pulling, but when they turned, I saw the shape of a car. It was covered in mud, doors open, one of the windows smashed. The officer came back to me and asked if I recognized the vehicle. I said no. He said it belonged to someone named Mark, and I had no idea who that was. He nodded again, writing something down, and then asked if Emma had mentioned anything about her ex. That's when it clicked. I remembered her saying once that her last relationship had ended badly, but she didn't say how. She just said he'd disappeared from her life, and she seemed almost proud about it. I didn't think she meant it literally. The officer said they were looking for a woman who matched her description. I told him I hadn't seen her yet, that she just texted me earlier about the picnic. He asked to see the messages, so I handed him my phone. He scrolled through them quietly, took a few photos of the screen, and handed it back. Then he told me straight up that her ex's car had been found abandoned a few hours earlier, right near the same spot she told me to meet her. They were still searching the woods for her. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to say. He asked if I'd been in contact with her that day. I told him she texted me the location at around 8, said she was setting up the picnic. After that, nothing. He told me to stay put and walked away again. I started replaying everything in my head. The way she talked online, how calm and normal she seemed, how this whole night picnic thing didn't sound that weird coming from her. But now it didn't sound romantic anymore. It sounded calculated, like she picked that spot on purpose. One of the officers yelled something from the woods, and everyone started moving toward him. They'd found something, but I couldn't see what. Another car pulled up, unmarked, and a few more people got out. Detectives, maybe. The whole area lit up with flashlights and camera flashes. Then when the officers came back to my car and told me they'd found signs of a camp area deeper in the woods. A blanket, some food containers, and what looked like personal items. He said they were still processing the scene, but it matched the setup of a picnic. I didn't even know if I should leave or not. I asked if she was okay, but he said they didn't know yet. They were still trying to locate her. He asked me again how I met her, how long we'd been talking, what kind of things she told me about her life. I told him the truth, just small talk, photos of her dog, random stuff about hiking and cooking. He asked if she'd ever mentioned her ex's name, and I said no. After about an hour, they finally let me go, but told me not to delete any messages and that someone would probably contact me later. I drove home in silence, the woods disappearing behind me in the mirror. I kept thinking about how close I'd been to walking straight into whatever was going on there. When I got home, I checked my phone again. Still no message from her. But her profile was gone, like deleted, not unmatched, just gone completely. Every message thread we had was still there, but her picture had disappeared. The next morning, I checked the news. There was a short article about a search operation in a wooded area outside town. It mentioned a missing woman and an abandoned vehicle connected to a domestic case under investigation. They didn't use names, but I knew it was her. Over the next few days, a few more updates came out. They said the car belonged to her ex-boyfriend and that he'd been missing for 2 days before the police found it. They were still trying to determine if she was involved or if she was missing too. No one could find her. That's what messed with me the most. The idea that she could have still been out there, maybe even watching that night. Maybe she saw the police lights before I did and ran. Or maybe she never planned to show up at all. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd gotten there before the cops. If she'd actually been waiting, would she have told me what was going on, or would I have just been another piece of whatever story she was trying to build? He told me he was a therapist, which honestly made me trust him more than I should have. He had that calm tone people in that field usually have, always pausing before he answered questions, like he was thinking about the most careful way to state things. His texts were polite, perfectly spelled, never rushed. He said he worked with trauma patients and spent most of his time helping people unpack their lives. I thought that sounded deep. Everyone else I'd talked to online only cared about dumb stuff like what I looked like or what kind of music I liked. He actually seemed mature. We planned to meet at this small Mediterranean restaurant downtown. He picked it. Said it was quiet, private, good for talking. I didn't think twice about it. When I got there, he was already waiting outside, holding a small notebook like he'd just come from a session. He looked exactly like his pictures. Clean cut, glasses, neat jacket. The kind of guy who looks like he drinks herbal tea and journals before bed. He asked if I'd ever been to therapy before, and when I said no, he smiled and said he'd try not to analyze me too much. That made me laugh, and honestly, it broke the ice. We got seated near the window. The place was quiet, warm lighting, soft music, the smell of grilled food and spices. It was one of those restaurants where everyone speaks softly, like they're trying not to ruin the atmosphere. He started talking about his work almost right away. Said he specialized in helping people through emotional detachment and identity crisis. I didn't even know what that meant exactly, but he explained it like he was giving a TED talk. He said he'd studied in different countries, that he'd worked at a few clinics, and even done guest lectures at universities. He talked so confidently that I believed every word. Halfway through our meal, I started noticing people looking our way. 2 women had walked in and sat at a table across from us. They kept whispering and glancing over. One of them was holding her phone tightly, her leg bouncing under the table. The other just stared at him without blinking. He didn't notice at first. He was too focused on telling me about the psychology of trust. Then one of the women stood up. She walked straight over to our table, hands shaking, eyes full of rage. My first thought was that she was his ex or something. But then she said something that made the whole restaurant go silent. She said he wasn't a therapist at all. She said he faked his degree and scammed people out of thousands of dollars pretending to be one. I froze. Everyone around us did. He didn't even look surprised. He just sighed and leaned back like he'd been expecting it. The second woman came over and started yelling too, saying he'd made her go through sessions that left her worse than before, that he'd manipulated people into paying for fake treatment plans. She said he'd been reported months ago, but he kept moving cities. He finally spoke up, calm as ever, saying they were lying, that he had all the credentials and could prove it. But you could tell he was acting. The confidence he had before was gone. His hands were twitching under the table, and he wouldn't make eye contact with either of them. The waiter came over, trying to defuse the situation, but the women weren't backing down. One of them pulled up her phone, showing messages and receipts. The name matched his. She said he'd taken her money promising to help her get over trauma, but all he did was make her record-long confession videos for his so-called research. The restaurant had gone completely silent, just forks clinking in the background and a sound of someone calling for the manager. Then, out of nowhere, a couple of uniformed cops walked in. They looked around, spotted him immediately, and came straight to our table. The women stepped aside like they'd been waiting for that moment. The officers told him to stand up. He didn't move. He just kept saying it was a misunderstanding that he could explain. One of them showed him some papers and said they had a warrant. That's when he finally stood up, but his whole posture changed. He went from calm to cornered in seconds. He tried to grab his bag from the floor, but one of the officers stopped him. They cuffed him right there in front of everyone. The notebook he'd been carrying fell open on the floor. Pages full of handwriting spilled out. Lists of names, random notes, phrases like Session 1, Rebuild Trust, and Patient believes I'm licensed. I couldn't even move. I just sat there, watching as they let him out. Everyone was staring at me like I was part of it. The women were crying, one of them hugging the other. The manager apologized to the whole room and said dessert was on the house, like that made any of it less weird. When they left, I looked down at the notebook still on the ground. One of the officers must have dropped it during the arrest. On the inside cover, there was a list of client names and numbers. Mine was written near the bottom. Next to it, it said, Test Subject, New Connection, Dinner Meeting. That's when my stomach dropped. He hadn't even seen me as a date. I was another experiment. I left cash on the table and walked out, ignoring everyone still whispering. The cops were still outside talking to the women, and one of them noticed me leaving. He asked if I was okay, if I was the one from the app. I nodded, and he told me to contact them later for a statement. I said I would, but I didn't. I went home and deleted every app I had. Later that night, I looked him up online. His name brought up a few forum posts and a local article. It said a man claiming to be a licensed therapist had been under investigation for fraud, running fake clinics, and collecting private information from women he met online under the pretense of research. It said he wasn't even his real name. He used at least 4 different ones in the past 2 years, each time changing his city once someone reported him. They said he'd never actually gone to medical school, just downloaded templates for certificates and printed them himself. For the next few weeks, I kept expecting someone to contact me, maybe the police, but no one did. They must have had enough evidence already. Sometimes I still think about how easily I fell for it. He didn't even do anything that obvious. He just knew how to act like someone you could trust. Every move he made was calculated. Even picking a quiet restaurant made sense. It's the kind of place where you can talk for hours and never be interrupted. The weirdest part was that he never flirted, never even hinted it was romantic. It felt like an interview disguised as a date. Every question he asked me now sounds different in my head. Things like, what kind of person do you trust easily? Or, how do you respond when someone disappoints you? It was all data for him. That's what gets me the most. Not the cops showing up, not the women confronting him, but realizing he probably already moved on to the next person before I even got home that night. I thought it was kind of funny when she suggested meeting at her workplace for our first date. Most people pick a cafe or a bar, but she said she was on call and couldn't leave the clinic for long. She worked as a vet, which sounded respectable and honestly kind of sweet. Her profile had pictures of her holding dogs and kittens, smiling with messy hair, that whole animal lover vibe. She said she loved her job so much that it felt like her second home. I figured it'd be something wholesome. Maybe we grab a coffee nearby or walk around after. The clinic was in this quiet strip of shops on the edge of town. It was one of those old brick buildings with big windows and a faded sign that said Lakeside Veterinary. The lights were still on when I got there, even though it was late, close to 9. She waved at me from inside, still wearing her scrubs, and told me she was finishing up paperwork. The place smelled like antiseptic and wet fur. The waiting room had posters of smiling pets and donation boxes for rescue shelters. She told me to wait while she locked up one of the exam rooms. I didn't mind. It was different, but kind of interesting. You don't expect a date to start in a vet clinic, surrounded by animal cages and medicine cabinets. When she came back, she had her hair tied up tighter and looked more serious than in her photos. I joked about it being a strange date spot, and she just smiled, saying it was quieter than anywhere else. She asked if I wanted a tour, which sounded harmless enough. I followed her past the reception area, down a hallway lined with supply closets and metal doors. Everything was spotless, almost too clean. You could smell bleach in the air. She opened a few doors and showed me rooms with examination tables, animal scales, x-ray machines. The whole place looked like any other clinic I'd seen, but then she opened one door that looked different from the rest. The lights were dim, and there were rows of small cages covered with blankets. I asked if they were boarding animals, but she said no, they were in observation. She said it casually, like it was normal, but her tone was flat. I didn't push it. I just noticed that some of the cages were locked with zip ties and padlocks, the kind of thing that felt off for a vet. We went to another room with metal tables and trays full of instruments, scalpels, syringes, gloves, even a few jars with samples that looked like tissue. I tried not to stare too much. She said they were for research and that she sometimes helped with studies for local universities. It sounded believable enough. I figured maybe vets had side projects like that. She poured us both drinks from a thermos she had in her locker, some kind of wine she said she'd brought from home, and we sat in the staff lounge. It was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. She talked a lot about her job, about how people don't understand how tough it is to make medical decisions for animals. She sounded passionate, maybe a little defensive. Then there was this noise, a short, muffled bark from down the hall. She froze for a second, like she hadn't expected it. Then she stood up and said she needed to check something. I waited there alone. The clock ticked too loud, and the wine didn't taste right. Metallic, like it had been sitting in the thermos for too long. The barking got louder, followed by scratching sounds, then silence again. When she came back, her hands were wet, and she looked pale. She said one of the dogs had woken up early from sedation. I didn't ask more questions, but she seemed distracted after that, glancing at the hallway every few seconds. We were about to leave when headlights flashed outside. A car pulled up fast, then another right behind it. Doors slammed, and people started shouting. She looked panicked for the first time. She told me to stay in the break room, her voice suddenly sharp, not calm anymore. Before I could say anything, the front door burst open. I heard voices yelling, heavy boots, radios crackling. Someone shouted her name. I walked out to see what was going on, but the hallway was already filled with men wearing jackets that said animal control and local authority. They were moving fast, opening cages, taking pictures, collecting things in bags. One of them saw me and told me to stay where I was. Another was yelling orders about getting the evidence secured. I didn't even know what was happening. I saw her standing near the back door, arguing with someone in uniform. She kept saying she had a license, that it was all approved, but the officer was shaking his head. Then I heard one of them say the words illegal testing. That's when everything clicked. The locked cages, the samples, the dogs under sedation, it wasn't for any university. She'd been doing something else, something she wasn't supposed to. They cuffed her right there in front of me. She didn't fight, just kept saying she was helping them. I still don't even know who them was. I stood by the counter while they took photos of everything. Some of the cages had animals that looked sick, thin, terrified. One officer opened a fridge and called another over. Inside were vials labeled with numbers, not names. They started batting them up. One of the officers came over to me, asked if I was involved. I told him I'd just come for a date, which sounded insane, even as I said it. He asked how long I'd been there, if I'd touched anything. I said no. He took my name and told me to leave. I walked out through the main entrance, past flashing lights and marked vans. They were loading animals into carriers, some wrapped in blankets. She was sitting in the back of one of the cars, staring out the window. For a second, she looked straight at me, and I swear she smiled. Not an evil smile, just empty, like she knew it was over and didn't care. I drove home in silence, still in shock. The smell of bleach stuck to my clothes. Later that night, I checked the news. There was a small article about an ongoing investigation into a veterinary clinic linked to unlicensed experiments. No names were released yet, but it was obviously her place. A few days later, they posted more details. Apparently, she'd been working with some private company, testing treatments that hadn't been approved yet. They were using stray animals to fast-track results. She'd been paid under the table for months. I kept thinking about how calm she'd been before it happened, how normal everything seemed. If I hadn't been there that exact night, I probably never would have known. Now, whenever I drive past a vet clinic, I can't look at it the same way. You just assume everyone who works there loves animals. You don't think about what happens when the doors close at night. I met him on Hinge, one of those apps where everyone pretends to be deeper than they actually are. His bio said something about loving quiet nights and meaningful chaos. He worked in finance, had this clean, serious look, like he'd been raised to keep his shirt tucked even when he was drunk. I liked that. We talked for about a week before he asked me out for dinner. Said he knew a place that did the best pasta in the city. I wasn't expecting much. I'd been on enough first dates to know they mostly end with fake laughs and excuses. But he seemed confident in that calm, effortless way. So when he said the name of the restaurant, I looked it up. It wasn't fancy, but it had 5-star reviews. A small Italian spot downtown that didn't look like it tried too hard. When I got there, he was already waiting at the table, perfectly on time, wearing a dark jacket and that kind of faint smile that looks practiced. The restaurant had warm lighting, low music, and one of those open kitchens where you can see the chef pretending not to listen to everyone's conversations. I remember thinking it was nice that he picked somewhere quiet. The waiter came over right away, all friendly, greeting my date like they already knew each other. They had that kind of vibe people have when they've talked before, but don't want anyone else to know. My date said he came here often for work dinners, so I didn't think anything of it. Everything started off normal. We ordered wine, talked about random things like travel, movies, bad dates. He didn't talk too much about himself, but he asked questions that made it seem like he was listening. Still, something about how the waiter kept coming back to our table bothered me. Not to check on us, just to whisper quick things to my date, like passing notes during class. He'd lean in, say something low, and my date would nod, barely reacting. I tried to ignore it, assuming it was about the bill or the kitchen or whatever. But then it happened again, and I noticed a pattern. The waiter would leave, go behind the counter, and come back with a folded napkin or receipt that he'd slipped near my date's glass. He'd glance at it, then tuck it under his phone. It was strange enough that I started paying more attention to what's happening around the restaurant. There were about 8 other tables, all couples, mostly quiet. The kind of people who eat slow and pretend not to stare at others. The staff seemed unusually tense. Every few minutes, one of them would disappear through the back door and not come out for a while. The food came, and I tried to relax. It was actually really good, and for a while, I forgot about everything. Until the door opened and 2 men in dark coats walked in. At first, I thought they were just customers, but they didn't wait to be seated. They split up, one walked toward the counter, and the other scanned the tables like he was looking for someone. The whole atmosphere changed instantly. The music kept playing, but it felt too loud, like everyone suddenly noticed it at once. The waiter froze mid-step. My date stopped eating and sat perfectly still. Then one of the men pulled out a badge. That's when people started whispering. The other waiter rushed to the kitchen, and the one serving us tried to act normal, but his hands were shaking. The detectives didn't raise their voices, but they were direct. They walked straight to our waiter, said something quietly, and he immediately started denying everything. I couldn't hear exactly what, but I saw him pointing toward the counter, toward the back room, even toward my date for a second. Then one of them told him to put his hands behind his back. Everyone just froze. The whole place went dead silent except for the clinking of silverware. I thought it was some misunderstanding, maybe an unpaid fine or something stupid. But when they cuffed him right there, people started pulling out their phones. The waiter looked terrified, like he already knew what was coming. My date kept his eyes down, didn't move. One of the detectives started talking to the manager, showing papers, asking for some kind of list. I caught pieces of what they were saying, something about accounts, transactions, fake invoices. I looked at my date, waiting for him to say something, but he just whispered that it was nothing serious. That's when I noticed his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't calm anymore. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were locked on the waiter as they led him outside. People started leaving. The manager tried to calm everyone down, saying the restaurant would still serve dinner like normal. But I couldn't stop watching my date. He looked nervous in a way that didn't match the situation. Not embarrassed or uncomfortable, genuinely worried. We stayed seated because I didn't know what to do. Then about 5 minutes later, one of the detectives came back inside. He walked straight to our table. My heart dropped. He looked at my date and asked if his name was Daniel. He nodded slow. The detective asked him to step outside for a quick word. He tried to smile at me like it was all fine, but his face had gone pale. He got up, straightened his jacket, and followed them out. I sat there staring at his empty chair, the half-finished plate, the napkin with a number scribbled on it that I hadn't noticed before. A couple minutes passed, then 10, then 20. He didn't come back. Eventually, one of the detectives returned and quietly told the manager to shut down the restaurant for the night. They started taping off the counter area, telling people to leave. As I walked out, I saw them loading both the waiter and my date into separate cars. Not the same one. That's when I realized they weren't together by coincidence. My date wasn't just some random guy who knew the waiter. He was part of it. Later that night, I searched his name online. Nothing came up at first, but by morning there were news articles. The restaurant had been under investigation for months. The waiter was accused of laundering money through fake catering invoices and splitting profits through ghost accounts. And my date, Daniel, was listed as the accountant who set up the books. I just sat there reading it over and over. Every time I read a line, it got worse. They had photos of them together in the back office, documents with signatures, and even text messages between them arranging payments. It hit me that I'd literally sat across from him while he was helping cover up a crime. The waiter had been dropping off payment slips right in front of me. The folded napkins, the whispers. It was all part of the exchange. I deleted the app that morning and stayed off my phone for a few days. But every now and then, I still check the restaurant's location on Google Maps. It's closed now. There's just a note saying permanently shut. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if those detectives came in 10 minutes later. If they'd arrested them after we left. Would I have gone on a second date? Would I have ended up part of it without even realizing? It's weird thinking about how normal everything felt right before it all fell apart. The warm lights, the smell of garlic, the soft music. Then suddenly you're sitting in the middle of a crime scene, realizing the person you're trying to impress could have been in handcuffs any second. I met her on a random Tuesday night after work. Her profile said she was an artist into truth through chaos, whatever that meant. She had those weird, mysterious captions under her pictures like, "Every wound is an opening, and my art hurts to look at." I didn't think much of it. People post weird things when they're trying to sound deep. She looked normal, though. Messy bun, black eyeliner, ripped jeans, the kind of artsy I actually liked. We talked for a few days, and she invited me to her art show that Friday. Said she'd been working on something powerful, and wanted me to be there when she unveiled it. She made it sound like a big deal, like some underground thing where only the right people got invited. I didn't think it was that serious. I thought it was just one of those student shows where everyone claps politely and drinks cheap wine. It was held in this abandoned-looking warehouse near the edge of town. The kind of place you'd expect to see graffiti, not art. When I got there, the lights were dim, and the air smelled like spray paint and sweat. There were people everywhere, mostly in black, with cameras, cigarettes, and the kind of confidence that makes you feel underdressed. She saw me right away, waved like she'd been waiting just for me, and pulled me in by the arm. She looked totally different from her pictures. Hair slicked back, dark lipstick, boots that looked like they could kill a man. She didn't look like she was trying to impress anyone. She looked like she was about to make a point. She told me the show was called The Men Who Broke Me. I laughed because I thought it was some kind of ironic title. Then I noticed the way everyone was staring at the walls, the big white panels lined up in a row, each with a spotlight. And then I saw the photos. At first, I didn't even realize what I was looking at. It took me a second to process that these weren't just random portraits. They were men, real men, and they weren't posing. They looked caught off guard, uncomfortable, vulnerable. Some of them were sleeping. Some were in their bedrooms. Some were, private moments. She stood beside me, arms crossed, watching my face like she wanted to see exactly when I'd figure it out. That's when she said it wasn't just any men. They were all her exes. Every single one of them. She printed their private photos, their texts, even screenshots of their messages, and put them on the wall as art. There were little captions under each one. The one who lied. The one who ghosted. The one who called me crazy. I recognized one of the guys from Instagram. He was a photographer I followed. Another looked like the guy I'd seen at my gym. I started realizing she must have gone through insane lengths to collect all this stuff. Some of the images looked like screenshots from security cameras or old phones. She even printed parts of conversations. The crowd thought it was genius. People were whispering and nodding, like they were witnessing something groundbreaking. But the longer I stood there, the worse it got. You could see panic spreading as a few people started recognizing the faces too. Some of the guys in the photos were actually in the crowd. I saw one man storm out, red in the face, while a group of girls clapped. She didn't seem scared. She looked proud. She stood in front of one wall, explaining that this was her reclamation of power. That these men had used her image, so she was reclaiming theirs. She said it like she rehearsed it. Everyone clapped again, phones up, flashes going off. I didn't even know how to react. My stomach turned because it didn't feel like an art show anymore. It felt like a crime scene. She kept looking at me though, smiling like she expected me to understand it, to be impressed. And then I noticed the setup at the back, a small projector playing a slideshow. I moved closer and realized she'd hooked up her laptop to display more images cycling automatically. Photos of people's faces, one after another, some blurred, some not. One of the slides flashed by too fast, but I swear I saw my own Tinder photo in it. I thought I was imagining it. Then someone shouted, loud enough that everyone turned. A guy near the front was pointing at one of the pictures, yelling that it was illegal, as she'd taken those photos without permission. Another guy was filming it all on his phone. The crowd started splitting, half cheering for her, half arguing. The music stopped suddenly. You could hear sirens outside. I thought maybe it was coincidence, but then the doors burst open and police came in yelling. They started telling everyone to stay where they were. Some people panicked and tried to run. Others just stood there frozen. She didn't even flinch. She stood perfectly still, arms at her sides, eyes locked on the wall of photos like she was proud of what she'd done. One of the officers grabbed her by the arm, and she still didn't say a word. She looked around at everyone and then smiled, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. I didn't move. I just stood there trying to process what I'd just seen. The police started taking down some of the panels and telling people to delete any recordings. A few people tried to sneak out, but they were stopped and questioned. It felt like time froze for a while. Everyone just standing around, whispering, phones buzzing, flashes still going off from people who couldn't stop filming. They escorted her out, and even then she turned her head back and made eye contact with me. Not scared, not angry, just calm, like this was all still part of the show. I left before they started asking questions. I remember walking through the cold night air, hearing sirens fade behind me. My hands were shaking, but not because I was scared, more like I didn't know how to feel. When I got home, I deleted her number, unmasked her, and sat in silence for a long time. A few hours later, a post about her show started circulating online. Photos, videos, everything. They said the police had confiscated the whole exhibit. Some called it a revolutionary statement about emotional abuse. Others called it revenge in disguise. I didn't comment. I didn't even want to be connected to it in any way. But the part that still messes with me is that I keep checking the background of those leaked pictures. In some of them, I can see my reflection in the crowd, just standing there, watching. You ever have a moment where you realize you were part of something insane, and you didn't even know it until it was too late? That's what it feels like.